right. So as you can tell, I've got the name wrong on the cover screen here. It should be Carpenter Dam, not Carpentersville Dam. But at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Ken Anderson. So Ken Anderson with ERA had my position at the Forest Preserve up until about mid-22. So he is actually the person who started this project with the Forest Preserve. So Ken.
Thank you, Jen. Thanks for the introduction too, Jeff. We'll go ways back. One of the things I want to just share with you right off the bat is so you kind of get a perspective of what was involved just to get to this point. You know, the state, the IDNR came up with a program to try to remove dams on the Fox River. Carpentersville Dam was owned by the Forest Preserve District of Kane County. And so they had an agreement that took many years to get to. So I'm just going to read you a few paragraphs for you. So whereas the district and their natural resources acknowledge that the dam currently fragments the Fox River by creating barriers that prevent the free movement of fish and other aquatic organisms at certain flow conditions. And whereas both the district and the natural resources acknowledge that the dam currently fragments the river by creating barriers that, that's the same one. Both the district and natural resource acknowledge that the dam may degrade the quality of the water upstream of the dam. And whereas both the district and natural resource acknowledge that the dam may be a potential safety hazard to people recreating on the water near the dam. And finally, whereas the district and natural resource are each in favor of removal of Carpentersville Dam and removal of the causeway, which is our Fabian Parkway project that was done 2 years before this, to restore the stream connectivity upstream and downstream of the dam to allow for safe canoe and kayak passage, to increase the general environmental health of the river in the vicinity of the dam. And that was the three main or four main whereases there. So history, the dam was make sure I get this right. Okay, click the mouse. The dam was Lowhead Dam, constructed in the early or late 1930s. As you'll find out, that the dam was thought to be a certain construction, and over years was improved, but most of the dams that are up and down the Fox River probably have the same base as what you're going to see in some slides later. Basically, there's concrete on top of it, but you'll find out what's below it in a little bit. The height of it is 9 feet and a length of 378 feet. It also has two raceways on both sides, which is not necessarily all of the Fox River dams in Kane County, but they had industries on both sides of that river at that point to be able to provide energy to do the milling and the other activities that they had at that point in time. Eventually, electricity came in and the raceways were no longer needed. Some of them filled in and basically became new shoreline that buildings were built on. In this case, both raceways are still there, but in limited capacities. So we got, the grant was basically signed in 2015 to do I talked about the Fabian Forest Preserve causeway removal. But then 2 years after that, which would have been like 2021, 2022 in that area, the Carpentersville Dam project started. Excuse me, 2019 with the engineering. V3 companies and Derrick will go into the construction of those engineering plans and how eventually Res did the removal. Took a period of time of getting permits. There was some dialogue back and forth with IDNR. Originally, when we came in with our submittal, we had most of the work, all of the work coming from the east side of the river, which there was that raceway we had to deal with. DNR told us that they can't do any work on private property. So we had to move the construction access to the west side. So it kind of changed the plans pretty dramatically. And also there was a change from working on a coffer dam that would be built upstream of the dam to a basically being able to work in the wet, which was a very good cost saving measure. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Derrick.
All right, thank you, Ken. I am going to. Oh.
One more.
Okay. I'm going to get into a little bit of the initial design considerations and some of the preliminary engineering, final engineering, and then some of the permitting. Oddly enough, or coincidentally, we presented this yesterday at the Illinois Association of Floodplain and Stormwater Management Conference. And I'm not sure, I'm not as familiar with the Wisconsin DNR, but a lot of what we're talking about here, some of the upfront study stuff that the Forest Preserve had hired us to do for them, our DNR, the Illinois DNR now is providing those services. So I think there's 11 more dams on the Fox, at least in Illinois, and all but 2 of them or 3 of them they want to try to take out. So I'm just putting it in a plug. There's other resources for those that are struggling or trying to figure out what to do with the dam, because there's going to be a lot more pressure, I think, leading up to 2026 when the Corps is trying to make a decision of who's in and who's out on the dam removal process. So let me jump into this. This is just some of the initial design considerations. Anybody that's been involved with the dam removal project, this probably all seems pretty normal to you. The existing documents review was a pretty short process because there were none, in the grand scheme of things. Even on the gazebo that's on the west side that the dam abutted up to, we didn't have any original design documents on that as well, because we were concerned that when we took out the dam, we didn't want to damage the Forest Preserve's gazebo overlook area. All of the different, environmental considerations, sediment characterization is a big one. And I'll get into some of the permitting advantages that we had. And then we got into the development concept plan, and then we'll go from there. So just to give everybody that hasn't been to the Carpenters, it's going to be hard for me to say it different now. Dam, the upper level here, this is you're on the west side and you're looking east, and it's at the gazebo / upstream impoundment. Then there's the path that leads there, and then immediately to the right of the path would be the west mill race. So not very functional, pretty much filled in, vegetated. And then what you can see on the last picture in the upper right is that's the downstream of the gazebo, and it's kind of a nice graveled area going down. So a lot of fishermen would access the river from down in that lower level, and a lot of families, because it's like a nice big little flat area down there. So now you flip to the east side and you're looking back to the west, you're on this like rock outcropping on the east side, and you're looking at the gazebo in this lower left photo, and you see the gazebo across. And then what you see in the pink there, that is a stop log structure that's on the east mill race, and that's on private property. It's owned by corporation that's on the east side, Auto Engineering, and that is a stop log structure. I think it's like about 6 feet. It's holding back water. And then on the last photo, what you'll see is there's a breach in the berm that runs along the mill race. So that provides connectivity between the mill race and the river in different storm events. So even if you're having an event where it's not overtopping that structure, it could backwater up into that mill race. So again, from a initial, we don't have a cursor here. I thought I saw somebody with a pointer earlier.
Pointer?
But anyways, just this would represent the east mill race, water flowing from the north to the south. The dam's right through here, and then the west mill race is right here, and this is that gazebo. Oh, here we go.
Bottom button.
So any project that is in a river, in a waterway, probably one of the biggest, both from a regulatory perspective and from a cost perspective, is the water management. How are you going to handle the water when you're working in and around it, and especially like a waterway? So one of the first things we did on the left was we looked at about 10-year period of Fox River gauge data, and then the previous, we just found out that's probably all going to be out the window in a couple of years anyways, or it's constantly changing. So we looked at about 10 years of it, and we tried to get rolling averages of when we were going to have windows for when we think the best time for construction is. And, whether we looked at the rolling 30-day consecutive values, or we looked at discrete daily values, we kind of did this analysis of the gauge information, and we found, no shocker here, but till mid-summer to late summer was the best time. And we had estimated conservatively, probably, and as it turned out, we had a drought year, so it worked out, but about 1,000 CFS is what we thought we may likely have to handle during that drought. We knew some of that period may be a little bit less flow. We may bump over 1,000 here or there, but part of that, what went into that, is we were trying to get just an understanding of, realistically speaking, during construction, so that when it goes out to bid, we're trying to be realistic for the contractor. We don't want to tell them it's going to be 200 CFS when we know it's likely not going to be that for the whole time. At the same time, we don't want to tell everybody you have to plan for the 2-year event, which would have been like, I don't know, 3,500 or something like that, because then it becomes cost prohibitive. So we're trying to be realistic in what we can accomplish there. And the other photo on that was just, we had to do the wetland delineation and that kind of stuff. We went out, did sediment characterization on the upstream and the impoundment. We had hired a barge, did some of it that way, and the downstream, you could wait out and get some of that information. For us, we were fortunate, unlike some of the other dams on the Fox, all of our sediment characterization, the results came back relatively clean. Basically, what was upstream and what's downstream is all the same. And there was no discrete areas or results of concern, which significantly simplified the process. So getting into the initial concept here, initially, again, because thinking water management, and we're thinking, okay, there's about 1,000 CFS that we think we might have to handle, and we have this east mill race and we have this west mill race. So we had some modeling. We looked at this and we said we can handle about 1,000 CFS with those mill races. So if we do some type of road or diversion out here, get out here to work, we could get the path established into these 2 mill races, we could pretty much take this out in the dry. And some of that was driven by, we met the Corps out there early on in the process. And, like most regulatory entities, they would prefer, if you're not working in flowing water, they prefer if we could take it out in the dry. So we started down this process of looking what that would entail. Early concept here is we're just taking out the dam and we're creating a rock transition there. Nothing really fancy at all. The state was pretty straightforward, and they got even more straightforward later. They want the dam out, and that's about it. They want a whole lot of other fancy stuff that goes with it. And I get it, because they're responsible for taxpayer dollars. So we get into preliminary design. We did a bunch of hydraulic modeling, although taking out a dam, honestly, is like one of the easiest hydraulic projects, right? You're only dropping the floodplain elevation, albeit for, it kind of works its way out as you go upstream. But right at the dam, in theory, we dropped the floodplain elevation anywhere from 2 to 3 feet. At the conference, we got a question like, did you guys do a letter of map provision? And in this particular project, it's almost all forest preserve upstream in the impoundment. There's no insurable structures. So there's really no value that came out of going through that. At some point, when the Fox gets restudied, all of these individual projects get absorbed into that restudy and a physical map revision. We did some sediment transport modeling here, trying to just get some understanding. We knew there was sediment upstream. This was a passive evacuation approach, just given the size of the waterway. We worked on some smaller projects where you take out the dam and you maybe try to go up and re-meander or reestablish what you think will be the thaw, or you create the new thowweg. It's not something that you're gonna do on the Fox, a river the size of the Fox. So it's passive evacuation, but we're trying to get some understanding of what that meant. So we ran sediment modeling and we ran it for like a year's time. What's interesting right now is we haven't had that year's time yet. We're kind of very interested in what happens this spring with the rains. See what it looks like again a year from now. One of the things we also looked at, this you probably can't tell, but this is just a hydraulic profile that extends about a little over a mile upstream. We had a boat launch that's further upstream in the impoundment, so we wanted to have some understanding of how that was impacted and how we would have to modify that boat launch. Plus, what this helped us do is create an exhibit that showed the areas that become exposed once that dam comes out. We did it for like a 500 CFS, 1,000 CFS. We initially ran a bunch of different scenarios. Again, not as big a deal here because it's all forest preserve upstream, but for communities like St. Charles or Batavia, the other ones that are contemplating taking out their dam, there are residents all along that impoundment that want to know, am I losing 5 feet or am I losing 50 feet of waterfront? And then Ken alluded to it, but we didn't know. Now we have a better idea of what these dams look like, but we didn't know exactly. So when you're going to bid out this type of project, you need everybody bidding the same thing. So we established, based on the general geometry of the dam, what we could tell, from the survey as best we could. We didn't, do any kind of subsurface survey on the dam, but we came up with a cross section and we considered it solid concrete initially, just because that would be take the most amount of time. It'd be the hardest to eliminate from time. But then from cost, when we put together the specs and everything, we knew that there's a good chance this isn't solid concrete and there's something inside, whether it's gravel or timbers, or hopefully that was it, and nothing else that would be inside the dam that would shut the whole project down. So we had everybody bid off of this as kind of a general cross section, but then within the specifications, we said assume 75% concrete and maybe 25% of something that would have to go to non-hazardous special waste. Maybe couldn't go to CCDD or something if it was a bunch of wood or timber or something like that. Just again, we're trying to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples during the bid. So this is the final design, and I will just say through the process, our idea of putting a path in here and utilizing the mill races, that got scrapped due to property owner considerations. Just in general, the state wasn't really excited about that. They had taken out some dams utilizing a causeway down here. So you can see up here, this would be the causeway, some equalizer pipes. So as water comes over the dam, it'd come down into here, go through, and you could work up here on the causeway while you take out the dam. Derrick will get into that in a little bit, but that could be a little bit challenging because you have reach issues and certain equipment and all that other kind of stuff. But the difference here in the final design was we were only accessing the dam from the west side. We were using the causeway, and then before, sometimes, and again, it goes back to the regulations. Sometimes when you do something like this, we know we're going to expose a bunch of mud flat. There's 2 philosophies. One is go out and seed all that mud flat, or just let the seed bank that's there come up and stabilize that mud flat. And the state preferred option 2 because it's more cost effective. And the reality of it is you can go out there and seed it and plant it and try to manage it, and it's gonna be unmanageable at some point. It is going to turn into what it is. The forest reserve has some pretty nice wetland / prairie upstream adjacent to it. So they're going to make sure that nothing propagates upland, but everything else will, that's down will still stabilize those banks, stabilize the mud flats. And it's a more cost-effective way of doing it. So right now, as we speak, it should be stabilizing. This stuff's popping. All right, I got one more slide. Permitting. Super easy to permit one of these. No, just kidding. But I will say, as dam permits go, we did this under a Regional Permit 5, which that program with the Corps no longer exists. They do have the Nationwide Permit 53 for wellhead dam removals, and there's certain conditions that come with that. And if you meet those conditions, you would also have the advantage that we had, which was our 401 water quality certification came with the Corps permit. So we did not have to go through IEPA separately and get an individual 401 water quality certification. Most dams in the Chicagoland area, not all, but most, likely aren't going to comply with the Nationwide 53. So there'll be a 401 water quality certification that will go with that in the future, at least for the ones in Illinois. We had, the dam removal permit from the DNR. They have their comprehensive environmental review process, their SERP, different consultation. We had to get a permit from Rob. And then the Kane DuPage was the last component of that. And honestly, in the grand scheme of things, the regulators were great to work with on this. I mean, there are certain things we definitely had to do, but at the end of the day, I would say for everybody that actually issued a permit, they were all very much pro dam removal. And the one that didn't issue the permit that came with the other permit, that's probably the only one where they're, I don't want to say anti, but they challenge whether or not, what the impacts of taking out dams are. So at the end of the day, it worked out. And that, I think now we'll get into some of the construction stuff.
Oh, yeah, so basically after D3 in Kane County, got through all their permitting process, we kind of jumped in here. The last key was getting KDSWC to approve our in-stream water management system. So that's kind of what you can see here. So we piggybacked off of D3's original design that he submitted to the Army Corps. We are using the downstream side causeway. There is a slight variation in that. I think if you remember back to the original slide, that causeway was actually separated from the dam face itself and had equalizer pipes running through it. Unfortunately, in order to create that trench and create that separation, you can utilize those equalizer pipes. That would have set us about 60 feet away from the dam that we had to remove. So we were going to have some serious reach issues. Also knowing that the cross section that was presented at the time of bid might not have been accurate. We didn't really know how far upstream this dam went. So we proposed a new method where we essentially proposed installing this causeway up against the face of the downstream, the downstream face of the dam. So yeah, you can kind of see it here. So we eliminated equalizer pipes due to the fact that it would just put us too far away. To compensate for eliminating those equalizer pipes, we upsized the riprap. So it was originally proposed to be RR4 riprap. We increased it to RR5, which gave us more pore space, which allowed water to basically overtop the dam, run through the rock underneath the machines, and keep us stable. Another reason for proposing this method was, again, not knowing for certain what this dam looked like, what was inside of it. One of the concerns from the contractor was once we got into the demolition of this dam, is if it's a bunch of, sediment and old rotten timbers in there, we wanted to avoid a blowout situation. So by building your causeway up against the downstream side, that also provided a little bit of extra contingency, security, and bracing for that dam once we started impacting it. So, yes, I'm kind of getting into our removal process. So as Derrick mentioned, this is work in the wet, so there was no diversion. And so it's basically a notch drawdown technique. And so with accessing from the west side, we decided to put our notch all the way on the east side. So that's kind of like the hot zone. And so essentially what we proposed was day one, notching 50 feet at 1 foot depth. And then basically taking a break that took all of 30 minutes essentially to make that notch. And then pulled the machines out, wanted to see how the river responded, see how the drawdown occurred. And then came back the next day, the additional 50 feet right here to achieve a full width of 100 feet. Same configuration, pulled off, let it draw down a little bit. To our surprise, the upstream impoundment really didn't change much at all. When we were only 1 foot depth at 100 feet wide, I think there was maybe 20 or 30 feet on the east side of this, on the west side of this dam that had water not overtopping at that point, but the rest of the dam was still overtopping. So going into our, day 3, same situation, another 50 feet, 1 foot down, take a break, come back day 4, same situation. So at that point, we were 2 feet down, 100 feet wide. We did start to see the impoundment drop down. Water stopped overtopping the rest of the dam. Causeway was completely dry at that point, but the impoundment was still, pretty far up there. There was the water level on the upstream side of the dam was only a couple inches from overtopping. So, notch day, right?
There's,
Gonna go back real quick.
sure,
To the other side,
there you go.
one more.
One more, oh, sorry.
Yeah, so then, the idea is our notch was always gonna stay 1 foot ahead of the rest of the removal. So you got 2 feet down, that's when we're able to remove a foot going all the way across. And then once we got that removal done, go back to the notch side, drop it down another foot, rinse, wash, repeat is essentially the method there. The idea being don't take too much at a time. We did expect some passive evacuation of sediment, but by doing it in these increments, the hope was to limit that. So there were some questions from KDFWCD. There's a page of comments because it was a different approach than what they reviewed and approved initially. But as Derrick mentioned, they were very accommodating. Had a 1-hour meeting with them, explained our reasoning, did make some adjustments per their request to our plan, and got it approved, and then we began notch day.
So I didn't mean to go too fast on Derrick there, but I was gonna pull pictures up while I was talking about actually notching the dam. So if you remember Ken Anderson's presentation at the very beginning, the district was awarded a grant in 2015. So it was part of the IDNR's River Obstruction Removal Grant. That grant was for $3.5 million to the district, and it covered actually 2 removals in the Fox River. The first was the Fabian Causeway. We took care of that right of way. And then in 2019, once that project was wrapped up, is when we moved on to the Carpentersville Dam site. So in late 2019 is when we signed the engineering contract and started that whole engineering, permitting, design process that Derrick Martin just went over from V3. So if you notice the date at the bottom of this, from December of 2019 until September 20th of 24, is how long it took to get through that whole process. But I joked through the whole thing that I wasn't gonna believe the dam was actually gonna come out until they actually notched it. So for notching day was a big deal, for me. But what Derrick was talking about earlier too, about how that notch kind of looked. So that photo that you see kind of in the upper corner, that's what it looked like after they had backed out of that first notch. So you're starting to see the water kind of flow through that notch and a little bit of that first level of the dam starting to appear. So again, this is the end of day 1. And if you remember in the first pictures, the dam was completely covered with water. And now even by the end of that first day, you're starting to see the dam dry out even with the first bit of notch. So as we roll into the first week, you're starting to see the top 2, 3, 4 feet of the dam starting to expose itself. And as Derrick mentioned too, we noticed that it wasn't nicking quite the way we thought it was going to nick when we first made that notch. And so everybody was kind of suspicious as to what was starting to go on. But by the end of the first week, we had an idea of what was going on. So in this lower picture here, you can see, there's the dam, there's the concrete dam. This isn't sediment. So back when this dam was constructed in the 1800s, somewhere in the early 1900s, they decided to put concrete on it, and we started to figure out how they did that. So apparently they diverted the water down the mill races and they built a causeway behind the dam to dry out the dam so they could pour the concrete. Even though we had done soil sampling upriver, we didn't soil sample within the first 20 feet of the edge of the dam. That would be incredibly dangerous. So nobody knew we had all this gravel and basically the dam behind the dam. So I'll turn this actually back over to Brehm to kind of talk about this causeway area a little bit more. That's the area in red. So this area in red that you see is actually the dam behind the dam.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so as you mentioned, the river just wasn't, the dam just wasn't nicking, the substrate behind the dam wasn't nicking. We were pretty confused as to why. which was causing the drawdown process to take a lot longer than we expected. So yes, so this red area, so we got out there in waders and we started poking around and surveying with soil probes and GIS equipment. Yeah, what we found is this very rocky, gravelly causeway material. I would say it was anywhere from 16-inch down to 3-inch stone. And it actually got, 50 feet plus upstream, so a pretty substantial causeway. Right after that, that's when you started getting into your soft sediment deposit. But so that red area is what we encountered. The other thing we encountered was, you probably aren't going to see it great, these smaller pictures down here in the middle. That's the actual cross section of the dam, surveyed in 3 different locations. You can see those cross sectional locations over on the left there. So again, very different from what the original proposed cross section was. What we found is it's about what is that? I think it was like a 30-foot slab going back from the crest of the dam, and then it essentially just had a forward face over the front of it. You can kind of see it here. That slab varied anywhere from like 2 feet to 1 foot thin, and then everything underneath that was the original construction of the dam back in the 1830s. So this kind of caused a bit of a pause in the construction. The project team had to get together with B3 and the state to determine best path forward. Are we gonna remove the dam and leave the causeway? Obviously the answer to that was no, because we're just removing the dam to leave the dam. So there's, some decisions that had to be made, and some, monetary value that had to be balanced. But, through adaptive management, within 2 weeks, we made a decision of, we're able to remove all the concrete, we're able to remove the what we kind of call the original cross section of the dam, all the way down to the original proposed grade, and we were able to also remove the causeway that they used to cap this dam in concrete.
So one of the things we didn't quite know at this time is how that dam was really constructed, and you'll notice down in here, actually what it was is boulder construction, so a combination of boulder and cribbing, and we'll see some of that in the pictures that come in a few minutes. But so the original was boulder, cribbing construction, and whatever they could find on the shores to throw in there to make a dam, and then they covered it over with concrete. And then so just again, second week, everybody's standing out there scratching their head about what we're gonna do. By towards the end of the week, though, we're starting to see some of those big giant granite boulders start to pop up. There's some of the old cribbing that was used in the original construction that's coming out. As we're rolling in, we're starting to pull some concrete. And by the end of that week, so that first week in October is when we're really starting to see that shoreline drop. And that's what we looked like. Oops. Oh, let's see if it's going to play for me. Oh, I'm surprised. Yay. So this is the end of the second week. We actually did a drone flight. So at the very end of the second week, you can kind of see the different, how everything is moving so fast.
Yeah, and I'll kind of point out here too, we always, I mentioned earlier, we were always going to keep the notch all the way over on river left. As part of this design, we did have to put in embankment armoring on the east and west embankment. That had to get keyed into a 709 elevation, which is basically 6 or 7 feet underwater. So we actually had to slightly switch our notch location behind us during this process as we were putting in the embankment on the east side. So again, a slight variation from the plan, but as you get into a complicated project like this, you have to be adaptive. So we switched over the notch to the middle to alleviate some of the flow to allow us to work in that notch location and get down that deep, put in the embankment armoring. That took a day. And then by the time we were done doing that embankment armoring, we then turned that middle notch off and returned all the flow to river left again for the proposed and approved plan.
I'm going to advance because I don't know how long this video lasts. We could be here all day. All right, so here we are, week 3. Concrete's almost gone at this point. We're starting to get more and more shoreline showing up. The mussels. So the mussels actually started showing up at the end of week 2. And we knew that was gonna be an issue all along. We just kind of expected there would be hundreds of mussels that we might need to relocate. Turned out there were thousands of mussels that needed to be relocated in this area. This took a joint effort between the Forest Preserve and the Friends of the Fox. So big thanks to Gary Swift and his team for coordinating volunteers to come out and help us. But we had both our Natural Resources Department and our Operations Department on different shifts going out, trying to move the mussels and get as many of them back into the river as we could. And at this point, we're starting to remove some of that old causeway. Here's another good picture of those boulders. And the kind of questions started to come out, what are we going to do with these boulders? So if you remember, Derrick Martin's original design was consider this a solid concrete structure and haul all of this stuff away. Those are beautiful. The last thing you want to do is throw that in a construction debris landfill. So working with Res, working with the IDNR, actually, and Army Corps and Derrick Martin and V3, we found a home for all of those. They did not wind up in a landfill. Most of them, I think, went to East Dundee, who was just down the river from us. They were doing some shoreline stabilization project. We were also able to use some of those boulders on the south side of our gazebo. So we couldn't put them on the north side of the gazebo because the flows on the river, but the DNR and the Army Corps agreed to allow us to put those on the south side, which is sort of the beach side, to kind of dress up the skirting around the outside of that gazebo. So thankfully, we didn't have to throw those away.
Yeah, we also received approval from the IDNR to install like boulder clusters out in the river. You know, clusters are 3 to 5 spaced out, 25, 30 feet apart, so we aren't, blocking any boat passage or anything, but again, just to provide some habitat to use these things instead of just dispose them off.
So here we are, week 4. Really starting to, in week 5, really starting to see things change out there. One thing to kind of keep at the back of your mind, so Derrick mentioned 1,000 CFS is the typical flow. At this particular point, we are probably close to 250 to 300 CFS. So if anybody remembers rolling into October last year, we were in a drought, which to the public's site looked horrible, but for us was a great thing because we wanted it as dry as possible. It makes it easier to get everything out of the river, but it does look a little shocking when you're at 300 to 250 CFS and the dam has disappeared. One of the other things that started to really pop up at this time again was just how much garbage was in the river and getting exposed. We found cars, tires, you name it, all sorts of stuff in the river. And again, a big thanks to Gary Swick and Friends of the Fox River for helping us do shoreline cleanup. We've got another one tomorrow, right, Gary? Yeah, we've got another one tomorrow. It'll be meeting at Carpenter site. If anybody wants to go help us clean that up, we would appreciate it. It's going to be a team effort. I mean, if you see that shoreline that's exposed, it's amazing how much stuff is still in there. And then really at this point where we got heavy into the contract negotiations between IDNR, Res, V3, and the district about how we're going to quantify both the boulders so that they could be paid for removing them, even if they weren't being paid to throw them in a landfill, as well as the causeway. Uh-oh. I'm missing an image. And it's completely gone. Okay. It was there earlier. So the image that you're missing, that I swear was there when we reviewed this at lunch break, that has magically disappeared, showed basically what the projected water elevation surface water exhibit was for the Fox River show. The green, if you would see it, would have shown what the Fox looked like 1,000 CFS before, while the dam was in existence, and then we had a dark blue slide that showed 1,000 CFS, and then there's a light blue path that showed 500 CFS. One of the big changes that you can't see in here is that we thought the main channel would go to the east or to the west side of the river. Around the island, there's an island in the middle of this. We really thought the channel was going to kind of go to that west side. It's really kind of gone to the east. And I don't know what happened to that picture. All right, so week 6, everything's almost gone. And November 1st was basically our deadline date. So for those of you familiar with the area, there's chain of lakes, there's Stratton Lock and Dam. The DNR drains the lakes starting November 1st. That is not a flexible date for them, barring any major emergency. They will open the dam, will open the locks and flood the river. So we needed to be out of there as soon as possible. So they're working frantically at this point. Just a couple things, never know what you'll find. So these are some millstones. So we found at least 3 or 4, I think, that were still intact, 4 that were intact. That the district was able to keep. We're going to try to incorporate them back on the site, hopefully this year or next year, as we do more of an updated historical signage and preserve to kind of talk about the history of Carpenter's Dam. But yeah, those were talking about how they built it, combination of boulders and whatever they could find on site. So pretty cool millstones. And this is going to take us about 2 minutes, but we had a time-lapse camera out of the gazebo that filmed the whole thing. So I can get it to play. There we go. Like on chipmunk speed.
Yeah, you'll notice we're actually in that chunk right now, a pretty decent long period where decisions and negotiations were being made, due to the changing conditions that we encountered. Birds loved it at that time. No traffic, good running water, lots of fish trying to run out that. Yeah, there's pretty much immediately once we put that notch in, we saw multiple different species running out over our causeway. And back at work again here, so.
I know. I gotta talk to somebody about that. I'm not IT.
Anybody else hearing Benny Hill?
Yeah, I think like one really cool thing that this video does point out is, yeah, with like good planning, a good in-stream water management plan, even though, it says we're working in the wet, you can tell the majority of the equipment traffic is in the drive for the majority of the project until the very end. Once water levels started rising on us, so yeah, we're going to KDS WCD, they were really happy and really pleased through the process, and yeah, ended up being a pretty successful project with pretty minimal impact in terms of working in the real wet.
Almost.
Derrick, do you recall how many days of rain we had during that construction?
I mean, yeah, the reason that September 20th, we were contracted into August, early September. Honestly, we wouldn't have been able to get in any earlier than that. Even during August, it was up at like 2,500, 3,000 CFS. But yeah, by end of September, it started drying out. I would say we probably had only 3 or 4 rain events, and everything was so dry that even like a 1-inch rain event, I think we encountered a 1-inch rain event and only spiked up to like 550 or something like that. I think the largest or the highest CFS we were working in towards the end of that project was around 850, 900. But yeah, the majority of the project happened right around 500, 250 to 500 CFS. It was really lucky for us, to be honest.
So as I mentioned again, kind of wrapping things up a little bit, shoreline cleanup has been a big thing. That's an old flyer. I haven't put Gary's new one in here yet. Mussels, as you can see, there's one of our staff members from Natural Resources collecting mussels. Actually, might be from operations. One of the little pimplebacks that we found. And a big thanks again to all the volunteers who were coming out helping us clean up all that garbage. So what's next? So talking with the DNR. So the IDNR did some fish sampling back in 2020, and they have plans this year to come out in summer and fall of this year and kind of compare what they found in 2020, compare their results. So those are their results from their 2020 And then also the Forest Preserve in the county will be doing drone flights 3 times a year for probably the next 3 years to just kind of monitor how the river is changing. So we'll kind of do a spring, summer, fall flight, stay on the same path and kind of watch how this changes over the next few years. And then also, as mentioned, vegetation monitoring. The district owns about 2.5 miles upstream from the dam on both sides. So kind of monitoring that from an outside, working our way in to make sure that those invasives and things that do pop up in the river don't carry back into the forest preserve. And this is just fun because never in my life do I ever catch a cool animal doing something, but I actually caught a bald eagle catching a fish while I was out there. And to just brag about it, the Army Corps was out that day too. So not only did the Army Corps get to see the eagle catch the fish, we had a fox cross the fox right behind us. I did not manage to get video of that. I'm so mad. But... And so with that, I guess we'll open it up to questions.
So if you were aware months were there, was there any thought of doing a relocation prior to the demo?
Relocating the mussels prior to demo?
Yeah.
No, I think our plan all along was to go out there and try to collect as many mussels as they were exposed. The original intent was to release them all downstream of the dam. And when we thought there were only a few hundred that we would be collecting, we thought that was something both staff could take care of and quickly. But as they started to expose themselves in the numbers, unless they were an endangered species, they went back in to the deeper water, upwater of the dam. If it was something that was an endangered species, then that was what we were trying to move down to the south or to the downside of the dam.
You have to get an ITA for that done, for the demo?
No, we did not. At least I don't think so. We did not an initial take.
There were 3 species of mussels primarily. It was the pimpleback, plain pocketbook, and giant floater. So
Pretty
you know,
common.
they're pretty common, widespread. So
Did you keep a list?
I'm sorry.
Did you keep a list of all the species?
Just the ones that we observed. Like I said, I got excited when you said that you guys were finding, and I don't know if they ever recorded, but they found that we're outside of those 3 species. Those are the only 3 that I saw. So kind of became a group effort. Everybody would go out with their bucket or whatever and pick them up and relocate them downstream. So.
I have a question. So, one of the things that you stated there is you expected hundreds of mussels, but we found thousands of mussels in the river. Doesn't that indicate that the river is a really good water quality already? And the dam really isn't affecting the water quality as much as we think? I mean, I would think that, more of the problem is what we were talking about this morning, of too much phosphorus and chemicals being dumped in the river itself. And maybe the dams aren't affecting the water quality as much as we think. I was looking at, there was a thing on the Forest Preserve website that beavers are quoted from the video to be ecosystem engineers because they alter their environment by building the dam. I'm also reading more online that, beaver dams are also beneficial to that ecosystem, generating diverse habitats, improving water quality and helping manage, floodwaters as well. So why are human dams so bad and beaver dams are so good? And the question I have is, as the dams are moved now, are we going to have different species of fish in the river? I know there's walleye currently in the river, an abundant population of walleye, which again indicates good water quality. Are we changing the species? Are the walleye going to die out and we're going to replace it with something that is a different fish in there? What's going to happen in environmental impact? I kind of question how much the dams actually affect the environment. I think it's kind of a big question I've always had. I don't necessarily believe the studies. I'm more interested in what's going into the river, not actually what the dams are doing into the river.
So, I mean, I can answer that a little bit. So first of all, as far as the mussels go, yeah, mussels are a good indicator. But you have to remember too, that mussels are only one indicator, right? So you've got fish and you've got other biota in that. Beaver dams. So there's a big difference between 12 to 40-inch high wooden debris beaver dam that comes and goes. And like if you were to look at the aerial photos, I spent a lot of time looking at aerial photos for Kane County. And the beaver dams are transient. They're there for a couple of years and they're gone. An 8 to 10 foot high concrete structure built in 1900 is not, it doesn't come and go, it's permanent. So that's why there's a little bit of a difference also because of the depth of the impoundment that's created in a beaver dam scenario, a natural scenario versus, the impoundments that we have on the Fox River. That's the biggest thing. There's a lot of data, and so I'll put my Fox River study group hat on. We have a lot of data over at our table if you want to take a look, but obviously when we talk about the impacts that the impoundments have on the fish species, that's been studied extensively for 30 years now by the IDNR fisheries biologists. All that data is publicly available. They put out reports, and somebody mentioned earlier they're out sampling every 5 years on a rotational basis for the Fox River. The other thing is that when we talk about water quality, so again, while we had a lot more mussels that were up there, 2 of the 3 species, if not 3 of the most common, but certainly the giant floater and the main pocketbook, they're kind of real rugged species. So it's kind of like if you had, and I don't know if there's any mussel people here, but I don't want to liken them to carp, but in the sense of they're very rugged, those are very rugged species. So just like if you were to see, carp or bullheads in a pond, you would say, well, wow, there's fish in there, so everything must be good. But the fact that you don't have all the other more sensitive species there, like in a pond, for example, and it's kind of the same thing with the mussels there. We were surprised to see as many of those mussels up there. That being said, while there's like a layer of fine organic material covering many of the areas upstream of the Carpenter Dam, by and large, the majority of the sediment is sand. And so, which again was a little interesting to see how that was distributed throughout, and that's where we had all these mussels that were put up there. We said relocated that. The other challenge with the dams is that from a water quality perspective, if you picture a free flowing river, it's very narrow, it's very shallow. It's in the Fox River's instance, no more than 3 foot depth in a natural scenario. You might have some pools here and there, but generally speaking, it's in that 1 foot to 3 foot depth. And so and then it's very narrow as well, maybe only a couple 100 feet wide. When we build the dams have widened the river to 300 to 400 feet wide. They're 4 to 5 or 6 feet deep. They interrupt that sediment transport. We all know that rivers carry not just water, but sediment, right? So that finer fraction is kind of it reaches an equilibrium where all the fine sediment is continuing to just kind of settle behind the dam. It gets washed out during a flood and then moves on during the next high water event. But what happens though is you get low dissolved oxygen because we talked about the nutrients that are in the system. So we get this, proliferation of algae, which then sucks out the oxygen at night. And so then that impacts the fishery. So, we start to see a decrease in the quality of the fish and that are occurring there. Think about the dams as being, the river does an excellent job of assimilating a lot of the material that goes into it, whether it's natural coming off the landscape or the man-made materials, our discharges, storm sewer discharges, our wastewater discharge. Does a pretty good job of assimilating that in a natural state. But when we build the dams and we turn it into a bathtub, it's kind of like trying to do its job with one hand tied behind its back. And anybody that lives in a subdivision that has a detention pond, you probably see this as well too, unless they have some type of an aerator or something, or usually you see highly eutrophic conditions in your detention ponds, and they have to spend a lot of money to try to maintain those and keep those going. And it's kind of the same thing, but in a larger river environment. Anybody else want to add? I think you have 30 seconds.
I think you summed it up.
And happy to talk afterwards. And if you want to see pictures, all these drone pictures they were talking about, we have them all over there on that computer screen. You guys can toggle through them from September through the removal.
Thanks, Rob.
Can I ask one other question? Why is dissolved oxygen so important?
Why is dissolved oxygen important?
Yeah, why is that so important?
Because that's, other than the water itself, that's what supports all of the life in the river. So, the mussels, the fish.
You're saying at night, the algae blooms, and that gets rid of the oxygen.
Yeah, because the algae is giving off oxygen during the day, right? When the sun shines, like the plants do, but then at night, then they're respiring, so they're consuming oxygen. So you'll see, we have plots here, you'll actually see how they're going to have what they call a diurnal curve, and so the deal will actually bottom out to like only a couple parts per minute. Sorry. But you know what, we should talk afterwards.
Yeah.
I'll be here all day.
All right, thank you.